23. And a programming note, the Lord has worked it out so we have kind of a convergence of material on 1 Samuel and David and so on. So we're in this character study sheets that we've been doing now for quite a long time. We're in David. And then in Sunday school, I hadn't planned it this way, but this is the way it developed. We're doing 1 and 2 Samuel. And then we have the Brown Brothers Conference coming in a couple of weeks, also dealing with David. So what's going to happen for our prayer meetings after tonight? So the next 3 weeks, next Wednesday, the Wednesday after that is, instead of doing the character sheets that are going to be covering a lot of the same material as the Brown Brothers Conference, I am going to read for you out of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. Just going to take a chunk of material, take 15 or 20 minutes, and read a bunch of chapters so that we're all familiar with it when the Brown Brothers get here for the conference. So rather than doing a guided study sheet, that's what we'll be doing starting next Wednesday, is just, bring your Bible. I might even try doing it out of a little different version, not the NASB, not the ESV, but a different version. And it'd be interesting, I think, for us to listen to that. So that's the plan for a week from tonight and the following Wednesdays beyond that. So for tonight, we're in part G, David flees from Saul, and I'd like to read for you out of 1 Samuel 23. Here's what it says. Then they told David, saying, Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are plundering the threshing floors. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall we go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, Go and attack the Philistines and deliver Keilah. But David's men said to him, Behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the ranks of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord once more, and the Lord answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. So David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, and he led away their livestock and struck them with a great slaughter. Thus David delivered the inhabitants of Keilah. Now it came about when Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, that he came down with an ephod in his hand. When it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he shut himself in by entering a city with double gates and bars. So Saul summoned all the people for war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. Now David knew that Saul was plotting evil against him, so he said to Abiathar the priest, Bring the ephod here. Then David said, O Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard for certain that Saul is seeking to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down just as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, I pray, tell your servant. And the Lord said, He will come down. Then David said, Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, They will surrender you. Then David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. When it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the pursuit. David stayed in the wilderness in the strongholds and remained in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. And Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. So here's another episode, and there's a lot of them in 1 Samuel where David makes an escape and just kind of barely gets out of the way as Saul tries to catch him. Question number 1 on the sheet, what is a threshing floor? Exactly. So you're going to beat the grain with a flail or a threshing device. It's quite often a long stick, and it's got thongs or maybe chain that goes to another shorter stick made out of heavy material. It could be metal, but it's quite often a hard wood. And it's a flail, and you're going to beat the grain. And the threshing floor is a wide open area, hard-packed dirt, maybe rock, but more often it's dirt. And it's likely to be on a bit of a hill because after you thresh it, you're going to winnow it. What would winnowing be? So you've got a fork, a special fork, and you dig your fork in, and then you get a forkful and you toss it up in the air. when the breeze is blowing, you don't want a gale, because that'll blow away the grain too. But you want a breeze that'll carry away the chaff. And then the grain falls back down, and you do that for a couple of hours, and now you have wheat or barley or rye. It's not ready for baking yet, but you've separated the stuff you can't eat, the stalks, from the grain. So this is a threshing floor. What would it mean then that the Philistines were plundering the threshing floors of Keilah? Stealing their grain, stealing their food. This is what they're got to live on. You know, they've harvested their grain, and now they're threshing it and getting it ready to mill into flour. But the Philistines are aware of this. They know what time of year it is, and they're up there in Keilah stealing the grain from the threshing floors. What does it mean to inquire of the Lord? To pray, to ask God, I have a question, and I need direction. And so David does this relatively frequently, to ask God, what should I do? Number 2, why did David inquire of the Lord a second time in verse 4? His men were afraid. So they all say, we are running for our lives every day down here in Judah, and you want us to go up north, where we're not familiar with the territory, where Saul could get at us more easily. Keilah is an exposed place, and that's not a good place to be. And so because of them, he asks God again, essentially, are you sure? Do you really want me to go to Keilah? And were David and his men successful in their battle against the Philistines? Totally, completely. They defeated them with a great rout, a slaughter, and even captured much of their livestock. Number 3, what feature did the defenses of Keilah have? Double gates and bars. So many cities did not have that. You know, a village or a little teeny tiny hamlet would have no defense, no wall of any kind. And then a fortified town would have a wall and a gate. This has double gates and bars. And what that probably means, if you can picture it in your mind's eye, is the first gate you would come to upon getting to a city would be, you know, this way, and you open it, and it would normally open in, and there'd be an L-shaped bracket on the inside of the gate with a big heavy beam across it. That's what locks it up at night. And then you would go in through this gate, and then you turn left, and here's another gate. You have to make a turn to the left. And the rationale for that is not only is it 2 gates that you have to get through to get into the city, but if you're riding a horse or driving a chariot, you're going to be pulling on the reins with your right hand, and as you come around that left-hand corner to go in, you're exposed to arrow shots. So they've thought it through, and they've thought about what is the most effective way that we can defend the city. So double gates and bars. But now what that means in Saul's mind is what? Right. He says God has got him trapped. So double gates and bars in a walled city means he can't get out quickly. So it's likely that what that means is Saul is planning a nighttime assault. Because in normal times, in the daytime, the gates would be open. So it likely means that Saul is going to come at night, surround the city, and David can't get out. He's trapped. I'm going to have him in my pocket, and he's stuck. He can't get away from me this time. So, number 4, David inquired of the Lord again in verses 11 and 12. What were his questions this time? Number 1, will Saul come down? And number 2, will the men of Keilah surrender me to Saul? And the answer on both counts is yes. Yes and yes. Saul is going to come. He is definitely coming. And the men of Keilah, even though you, David, just saved their city, they are going to say, we don't want Saul trying to knock us down, burn us out. So, sorry, David, but we're going to have to hand you over. So God said to David, yes, Saul is coming, and yes, the men of Keilah will hand you over to Saul. So what does it mean that David and his 600 men went wherever they could go? Yeah, he says, guys, this is emergency procedure. Everybody's on his own. We're not marching out as a unit. Get out any way you can. We're going to meet at the cave in wherever, in a week. But go now. Climb over the wall, get out, run, hide behind the rocks, and scatter. So this is every man for himself. Get out and survive. So this is not an orderly, it's all march in order and everybody with your spear on your shoulder. No, this is run. Run and hide. Number 5, where was David hiding in verse 15? The wilderness of Ziph. What a great name. Ziph. And who came to visit him there? Jonathan, the king's son. And remember that Jonathan had made a covenant with David, and they were friends. They were dear friends. And Jonathan has come to realize that his father is a madman and hates David for no cause, for no reason. But Jonathan, what does he say to him? What does Jonathan say to David? You will be king, and I will be next to you. I'm going to support you. Remarkable man. Apparently he had a sense, he had a recognition that God had appointed David to be the next king. It should have been Jonathan, right? Because Saul is his father. He's next in line. But Jonathan seemingly bears no ill will, does not wish harm on David, doesn't want to have him killed. And in fact, he says, you're going to be the king, and I'm going to be your right-hand man. He's giving him 100% support. Never underestimate what loyal friendship can do. Never underestimate how encouraging a loyal friend can be in hard times. And Jonathan was that to David. Number 6, who went to talk to Saul in 1 Samuel 23:19, and what did they say to him? The Ziphites. Here's another case of betrayal. The Ziphites, they go to him, and they say, we know where David is. So how did Saul respond? Yeah. So isn't it strange, back in Keilah, Saul heard that David is in Keilah, and he says, the Lord has given him into my hands. And here he says, may the Lord bless you. The blessing of the Lord be upon you. Isn't it weird when people say things that we say in a godly fashion, but they've twisted it? What does Saul mean? He means the Ziphites have betrayed David, and now he can go kill him. What a backwards understanding of blessing that is. He's twisted in his mind. And so what did he want the Ziphites to do in verses 22 and 23? Spy on David, get more information. Where does he go? Where does he hide? What are his routines out there in the wilderness? Does he have a particular cave or a fortress that he hides in sometimes? You watch him for a week or two and come tell me. And did the Ziphites do that? They did. They did. Once again, you wonder about this. Why? Do they not understand? And perhaps it's just political. They see Saul is the king. We need to be in his good graces. We'll do whatever it takes to make King Saul happy, including betray David to him. Maybe that's what it is. At any rate, they did spy on him, and they did get information back to Saul. So number 7, describe the scene in 1 Samuel 23:24 through 26. What's going on there?
Saul was pursuing him
Yeah.
in the wilderness until he heard the Philistines were attacking.
So Saul is coming around a mountain right here, and nearly within eye shot or earshot, David and his men are creeping around the other side of the mountain. They're just a few yards away. And they're going as quiet as they can, because if they scuff their feet or knock a rock off a ledge, Saul is just there. And so Saul is going around this way, David and his men are going this way. cat and mouse. It's a very, very near thing. David's life is on the line, except for one thing. Can you think what that might be?
God is with David, not with Saul.
And how do we know that? Was David certified in any way? Carl says yes. In what way? He was anointed. God said, you're the next king. I choose you. Saul is going to be done. And that one fact changes everything. It may look like this is a near thing. David is about to die. Saul is 20 feet behind him. All he has to do is look to his left, and David is dead meat. But the reality is, because God chose David, he anointed him. David is not going to die until God says. He's going to be the next king, even in these hard circumstances. So Sharon pointed out that Saul's pursuit of David was interrupted by news that came to him, and that news was of what? Another Philistine raid. The Philistines had got in and made another raid, and he, maybe he was upset. Oh, I'm so close to him, I can feel him, I can smell him. But he's got to go chase the Philistines off, and so he leaves David and heads off. Number 8, En-Gedi, mentioned in 1 Samuel 23, 29, and 24:1, is a wild, barren place, a short distance from the Dead Sea. Near En-Gedi is an oasis, too. It's actually very beautiful. There's a little waterfall, there's palm trees, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place in the middle of the desert. And all of a sudden you come into this kind of a cleft. There's a ravine there, and palm trees. And wild goats still do live there in the rocks. So where were David and his men when Saul went into the cave? They were back in. They were farther in. So the whole En-Gedi area, the whole Dead Sea area is riddled with caves, dozens and hundreds of caves. Some of them are tiny, some of them are huge. And David and at least some of his men are way back in, and Saul comes in. And so he's somewhere towards the mouth of the cave, and David and his guys are farther back in. So number 9, what did David's men say to him about Saul? So here's the reverse flip side of what we've seen Saul say, the Lord has delivered David into my hands, and blessed be the men of Keilah, and so on. Blessed be the Ziphites. So this is the flip side of that. David's men say, here's the day that you've been waiting for. The Lord has given him into your hands. He's right there. All you got to do is use a spear, use a sword. You can reach out and touch him just about. And so kill Saul. This is what God has planned. God has given him into your hands. And David says what? I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. I am not going to kill him, even though he has tried to kill me. I would suggest to you that this is one of the reasons, one of the ways in which David maintained his own walk with the Lord and his sanity. Here's something I've pondered, and maybe you have too. When you read the account of David in the Old Testament, how many battles was David in? Dozens and dozens and dozens. And what kind of battle, what sort of warfare was this? Hand to hand, up close and personal, with a spear and with a sword. How many men do you think David killed? Lots of them, hundreds and thousands and maybe tens of thousands. Lots and lots and lots of men. How could he write poems and songs about loving God and about the beauty of creation and about loving children? And, well, I think at least part of the reason is he only killed because he had to. He was a soldier because he had to be a soldier. But he did not delight in killing. It was not something that he said, I'm really good at it, and I like to do it. And here's the case. He's got Saul. Saul hates his guts. Saul would like to have David dead. And David says, I am not going to kill him. In effect, what is David saying at this moment when he says, I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed? What is David saying? He won't go against the Lord. He's going to follow God's saying. He's trusting God. He's saying, I'm going to trust God that what God said to me, I'm anointed to be the next king. I'm trusting God that God will fulfill that in his timing. I am not going to take it into my own hands and kill the king.
God had already said that he would judge Saul.
Yes.
Saul was under God's judgment, and if God would take care of it.
Yep. He's going to leave it in God's hands, and he does. So what did David secretly do? So, Saul is in the cave, and David sneaks up behind him. Saul doesn't know what's going on, and he takes his sword, and he cuts off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe. And Saul doesn't even know it. And then he leaves, and he goes down the hill. And number 10, the hem of a Jewish man's robe was specially directed by God to have what on it? Tassels. Tassels. Does anybody remember what color they were? Blue. They had to be blue tassels. The tassels seem to symbolize that man's loyalty to heaven or to God, and thus perhaps they symbolize that person's relationship to God. By the way, the Pharisees in the New Testament, Jesus had a comment about their tassels. Do you remember what it was? They enlarge their tassel. So, you know, if a tassel of 4 or 5 threads is what a normal Jewish man wears, then a Pharisee wears a pom-pom, you know, because I am the holiest man alive, and everybody knows it. And so the Pharisees had these very large tassels to prove I am a spiritual person. But when David cut off Saul's hem and maybe a tassel with it, what happened to David? He felt bad. His conscience bothered him. Now, if it's just a robe, and I'm going to prove to you I could have killed you and I didn't, well, that's one thing. But if he cut off a tassel, what is that? Well, it's almost like character assassination. To be a Jewish man without a tassel, it's like saying to everybody, I don't care about God. I don't have a relationship with God, and I don't need to. And that may be why David's conscience bothered him. So as Saul goes down the hill, David, his mind is in turmoil now because he thinks he shouldn't even have done that. That he thinks is probably a wrong thing to do. Now, question number 11, David kept his men from doing what in verses 6 and 7? So they said, if you don't want to kill him, we'll kill him for you. You don't have to lift your hand. Just get out of the way. We'll lift our hand because we know what he's like. He has been hunting you and us all over the backside of the desert for months. We can take care of this problem right now. You're the king. You've been anointed. Everybody knows it. Just get out of the way. And sometimes courage is not just standing up for what's right. It's not permitting what's wrong. And that's what David does here. He says, no, nobody is going to touch Saul. I won't allow it. You're not going to kill him either. I won't do it, and I'm not going to let you do it either. Number 12, after Saul had left the cave, what did David do? So he stands at the mouth of the cave. Saul is down the hill a little ways. He comes out and he holds the piece of robe, the tassel, the hem, and he says, my lord the king. And he calls out to him. Saul turns around, and what did he say to Saul? Essentially, he's saying, if I had wanted to kill you, I could have done it 3 minutes ago. You were right here. And if you want proof of it, take a look at the bottom of your robe. I have it here in my hand. I was that close to you. I didn't kill you because I don't want to kill you. I am not trying to hurt you. What are you doing? And that robe, that piece of robe, is proof that he's not seeking Saul's life. He even says, question number 13, what promise did he make to Saul in 1 Samuel 24:12? My hand shall not be against you. I am not going to try to kill you. I am not seeking your downfall. I am not attempting to undermine you. I had a chance to kill you just now, and I didn't. David compared himself to what in verse 14? A dead dog and a single flea. He says, what are you doing chasing a dead dog and a single flea across the wilderness? What is the point of that? What am I? I'm a single man. I'm not an army. I'm not the Philistines. I'm not the Ammonites. I'm a single man. Why are you tracking me down? What is this for? And so, who is David asking for deliverance in verse 15? The Lord. He's calling out to God, and he's saying, I am committing my case to the Lord, and he is going to take care of this. He's going to judge between me and you, and God is going to deliver me. So this is interesting. Question number 14. What did Saul do next? He started crying. He started weeping. And why is he weeping? It doesn't say, but in the context, it would seem that it's shame, embarrassment, guilt. He recognizes. I think that Saul is in this spiral of insanity and madness, and sin has such a grip on his life. But there are moments of lucidity. There are times when the light shines through and he gets reality. This is one of those times. He realizes David had a dagger in his hand. He could have put it through my kidneys, and he didn't. He's not trying to kill me. Why am I trying to kill him? And, reality crashes in on him. What in the world am I doing? What has gone wrong in my life? Why am I like this? And he's a mess. What admission did he make in verse 17? You are more righteous than I am. You're the righteous one, and I am wicked. What did Saul say that he understood that day? David is going to be king. He says, you're going to be the king. I get it now. I've been trying to hang on to the kingdom, and I understand now God is giving you the kingdom. You're going to be king. And then here's maybe most remarkable of all. He said, since you're going to be the king, I beg of you, make me a promise. What was the promise? Don't kill my family. Now, to us, that's something, well, of course he's not going to kill your family, but why would that be a real deal? Yeah, Jason.
Because back in that day, to stop somebody else from being king, they would kill both families, so they keep
Every descendant, every son, especially every male descendant, maybe just a whole clan, every son, every grandson, kill them all. Every nephew, everybody who is related to Saul. Sorry, y'all got to die. Because I don't want to be sitting on my throne and wondering which one of you has a dagger behind me. And so that was normal. That was normal behavior in royal houses in the ancient world, and actually in the not so ancient world too. You protect your throne by killing off anybody who could make an alternate claim to the throne. And so, did David make that promise? He did. And again, that's unusual too. Normal protocol would be to say, well, we'll see. Which means, to your face, I'll say anything you want, but when you're dead, your family's out of here. But David did say, I will not kill your family. I'm not going to go after your descendants. So, remarkable set of passages on Saul and David. Do you have any questions or comments? Yes?
How do you think they knew back then when they killed everybody? Would they just flee and just never let them know they related, or
It varied with the time and the culture. Sometimes it was assassins that would sneak in and do it. Other times, I mean, this is so bizarre to us, we can't even think like this. But there were occasions where a dynasty fell, so they would collect all the royal house and offer them as like a sacrifice. So deliberately slit their throats or sometimes bury them alive, just horrible, horrible. And of course they had nothing to do with it. They were just a family. This warfare among kings and so on is an entire, they're just the kids or the concubines or the wives or the nieces and nephews. They had nothing to do with it. But you got to protect the throne, and so kill them all. Okay. Horrible. Really, really horrible. Yeah.
It always amazes me when that these tassels, how are they attached? Because it seems amazing that sword that goes through battle and everything else, or a dagger, you make that nice clean slice without somebody else.
So the tassels are attached, probably woven or threaded through the corners of what's called the mantle. It's a cloak. It's pretty thick wool. And the tassels themselves would have been, I can't remember now if it specifies if they're wool or they're linen, dyed blue. But, they would have been threaded through and knotted probably. But what that would speak to would be they were able to get a good edge on a bladed instrument. So, we think, oh, well, this is 1000 BC, 3,000 years ago. Probably the edges on their swords are kind of raggedy and, kind of tear and catch. Well, evidently not. Saul was still wearing the robe in the cave, but he didn't feel David tugging on it, and so the knife or the sword or whatever cut cleanly without Saul even knowing it. So the edge on that blade must have been really sharp. That was a good blade. Probably steel, possibly bronze, but they could sharpen it. Yeah? Other comments, questions, observations? Okay, take your prayer bulletins, please.